When creating a game, certain choices need to be made, which undoubtedly have an effect on its stability. Is the game single player or multiplayer? Is it infinitely replayable or a one-time journey? Is there an end game, or when it's over, is it truly over? Without a doubt, one of the most unstable game genres is the MMORPG. Now, the game market is ever-changing, and instability comes in ebbs and flows with whatever is popular in the gaming world at the time. Look at the massive influx of battle royales that popped up in the wake of PUBG and Fortnite in the summer of 2017. How many of those games still exist today? I'll answer that question for you. Not many. The same goes for the hero shooter genre, whose instability can easily be seen in the massive failure of Concord, although mayhaps Marvel Rivals will be able to top Overwatch and spawn a new golden era for that genre. But this isn't actually what I'm talking about in this video. MMORPGs have come out in waves since the massive success and popularity of EverQuest in 1999. Juggernauts like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV have captivated the world and managed to maintain a player base for sometimes even decades. And it truly seems like they have figured out the formula for the genre. But creating a fully living world like an MMORPG is a massive undertaking, and at its heart lies an unstable core. A balancing act of keeping player counts high, even when they've reached the end of the journey and are waiting for a new expansion to release. Many have tried to make an MMORPG, and many have failed. This video is about an MMORPG, not one that failed necessarily, and one that I love dearly, but one that couldn't manage to stick around and eventually shut down. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you probably watched one or multiple of the following TV channels: Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, or Cartoon Network. And I list them in that order because that's the order that they appeared on my TV listings back in the day, although that's probably changed since I was a kid. I would occasionally watch shows on Nickelodeon, and I never really got into the Disney Channel, but by far my favorite channel was Cartoon Network. And the early 2000s was a golden age with shows like Ed, Edd n Eddy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, and let's not forget the absolute cartoon masterclass that was Chowder. Cartoon Network was my go-to, so it should come as no surprise that one of the games I played that I can without a doubt say had the biggest influence on my life was Cartoon Network's FusionFall. If you're someone younger than I, which, let's face it, you probably are, because even at 25, I am an old man on the internet. You probably haven't heard of FusionFall then. It might also be that you were too busy watching the Disney Channel or Nickelodeon at the time to know what the hell I'm talking about. But for me, FusionFall was a big deal. FusionFall was the second MMO I ever played, and I know that sounds weird for me to say out loud, like, oh, it wasn't even your first? What makes your tie to the game so strong then? But in all reality, the first one I ever played was Pirates of the Caribbean Online, and while that game was important to me, it taught me how to play blackjack and Texas Hold'em at the ripe age of 7, so I could be thankful for that. But FusionFall was a defining moment, capturing all the things I loved and bringing them together into one place. It was mind-blowing for 9-year-old Andy, and I'm sure that experience was the same for other kids who grew up playing the game. But what was FusionFall for those who may not be familiar? Cartoon Network's FusionFall was an MMORPG aimed at kids and teens, featuring characters from all the channel's shows together in one cohesive universe, set amid the backdrop of an alien invasion storyline. It sounds crazy, although in the age of team-ups like the Avengers, maybe it isn't anymore, but at the time, crossovers like this just didn't happen, especially ones of this scale. This wasn't just a fighting game like Super Smash Bros. This was a complete world that tied together different locations and characters from Cartoon Network and put them together in one cohesive space, an absolutely sprawling map for players to explore. The plot on paper is fairly simple. Planet Fusion is an evil planet traveling through the universe, destroying other planets in its wake, and the next target is Earth. But the heroes of Earth will not let that happen. Dexter of Dexter's Laboratory fame and Mandark, also of Dexter's Laboratory fame, team up to create nanos, miniature versions of the heroes of Earth that can harness the powers of their real counterparts. And that is where the player comes in. The plan is simple. Dexter wants to send you back to the past to stop the invasion before it's too late. The problem is that his younger sister, Dee Dee, also of Dexter's Laboratory fame, pushes a button mid-teleport, sending you further into the future. The player must then work with the heroes, fighting off Lord Fuse's evil minions and fusion versions of those heroes to get back to the past and ultimately save the world. Now, that's the story as presented by the game, but there's actually a much deeper lore to the world too, one that's hinted at by in-game dialogue, but it's actually uncovered by going back to before the game was even in beta. That's right, the setup for this entire world was a semi-short comic which was given out to guests at the 2007 Comic-Con, and it's now all but impossible to get your hands on, unless someone still has a copy and they want to send it to me, wink wink, because I want it really bad. The comic also used to be digitally available on the FusionFall website, however, that site is sadly long gone. But I do want to give a huge shout out to the people who have dedicated their time to the FusionFall wiki for making it available there, so it is actually still readable to this day. I won't go too deep into it, but the comic, FusionFall Worlds Collide, helps set up this crossover universe where all the different characters are intermingling. Primarily, it follows the uncovering of Planet Fuse by Dexter and a few others, and the first wave of the invasion as the heroes of the world work to fight back and prevent utter disaster, ultimately failing as the first wave turns into an all-out planetary takeover. FusionFall was officially released in January 2009, although the game had been in open beta for several months before that, and for its first year it actually required a subscription, but by April 2010 the game was made fully free to play, sowing the seeds for the game's eventual closure in 2013. It lasted 4 years before shutting down. Now I will go into why I think the game shut down later in the video, but for now, I want to look back at FusionFall as it was. Surprisingly, looking back at the game was easy to do, because I was still able to play it. But how is that, you might ask? You just said the game was shut down, and I say back to you, shut up and watch the dang video before asking your stupid questions. FusionFall has always been at the heart of a small but immensely dedicated fan base who have worked tirelessly to make the game available to this day. Multiple projects to both re-release the game and even to improve and add to it have come and gone over the years. Most notably, FusionFall Retro and FusionFall Legacy were shut down in 2020 after a DMCA takedown request by Cartoon Network. The former being a version of the game as it was in 2013, and the latter was a project working to update the game, adding new Cartoon Network characters to the universe. I remember playing on FusionFall Retro back when I was in college, before it got shut down, and talking with the community back then, you could really feel the love and dedication for the game that impacted so many people. Even though those projects are now gone, there's still a way to play the game through Open Fusion, which is an open source version of the game, allowing players to play on a few hosted servers or even host their own servers. Within the Open Fusion community, there are a few different servers and projects going on, including Retrospective, which includes updates to the base game with a few small changes. Needless to say, to this day, people still care immensely for this game, and a lot of work and care has been put into keeping it available for future generations. So, now that my long and meandering intro is out of the way, let's actually go back and look at FusionFall. And I'll be honest, I started filming the footage for this video like 10 months ago, because originally I had a plan, but then the plan fell apart. I was trying to figure out the best way to objectively look at a game that is so immensely clouded in nostalgia for me. So, I decided the best way was to experience the game as completely as possible by completing a task that I never achieved as a kid. Actually beating the game, reaching max level and defeating Lord Fuse. But as I played, my willpower to actually do it was just drained because FusionFall was nowhere near as good as I remembered it being. So, let's talk about it, starting at the very beginning. Getting back into the game felt kind of like a homecoming for me. The introduction was like exactly what I remembered from when I was a kid. It's pretty basic, but it kind of needs to be because it's for a kid's game. It teaches you how to move, how to fight, how to use all your menus. And while it does all feel really dated now, one thing that is constantly, and I mean constantly, bugged me about FusionFall is playing it now. The way the game works is you have to put the game manually into full screen mode every time you play it. And then it's so easy to accidentally hit escape and immediately close out of full screen mode. And that's just, it doesn't have anything to do with the game itself. It's just something that's always bugged me. But it doesn't matter for playing through this introduction. It's very simple. You do a couple quests, you help people out, and you get your first nano, which I have not talked about yet. Nanos are basically your abilities in this game. You get 3 slots for 3 nanos, and basically every time you level up, you get a nano. You have to do a mission to unlock it, and it's a different miniature version of a Cartoon Network character. And when you unlock them, you get to choose one of 3 abilities for that nano. So the game is actually super customizable, which is not something you'd really anticipate from a game like this, but you have so many free choices to do, and you can actually later on in the game respec if you want to. So you don't have to get too in depth into what you're choosing right away. You can always feel free to switch things up later. Plus, there's so many characters that there honestly isn't really even a point. I think in the base game, which I'm playing, there are 36 nanos, and 36 options for 3 slots is a ton. It's an absolute ton. And so you'll probably end up sticking with 3 of them most of the way through the game anyways. The introduction also introduces the player to the main conflict of the game, which, to be very fair, is not that intense, but it gives you an opening cutscene, which is just still images with some voiceover, but it really gives the player just a very easy sense of, okay, here's where I am in this world, and this is my role, and I think that does exactly what it needs to do. There's nothing really to fault about this whole introduction section. After the introduction, you're taken to your first open world, which is the future. And it was an area that I played a lot as a kid, both in the beta and once the game actually came out. And so I still felt super nostalgic about it, but I did really start to see some of the game's problems. So even for this first opening area, which is only a fraction of the size of the main game's open world, it's too big. It's honestly too big. And the problem there is that it makes questing and just getting around in general feel really, really slow. For the most part in the future, the objectives are pretty close together, which is a good thing because it really gives you a sense of the world. But you'll start to see as you go on, they get further and further apart, and the run times between everything makes it feel kind of mind-numbing. I don't really want to fault the game for this, though. I kind of chose to look at it for the demographic that it was actually aiming for. And I think this works really well because you're introducing a younger generation to the world of MMORPGs. And this gives them that opportunity to experience oh, hey, I am in a big, thriving, living world. This isn't just a single-player experience. There are people around me. There are things constantly happening. And I think the overall size and scale does help add to that sort of awe element. It also doesn't have quite as much of an impact because I feel like as a kid, when I was playing this game, I wasn't really focusing on how long it took to get from A to B. I was kind of more immersed in the world, where looking at it from my current older perspective, I take more fault with it and think, oh, there are so many better ways they could have optimized this, and they didn't. But they don't care about that. This is a kid's game. The kids are getting immersed into a world for the first time, and I think there's something beautiful about that. The Future Zone has a ton of quests to complete, way more than you actually need to reach the required level to proceed to the main game. And while I think that's a really good thing for this area, it makes the because it's still basically like an intro section. This is an extension of that intro. But while it's good there, it kind of sets a bad precedent for what happens in the rest of the game, which I will talk about later when it comes to how this game handles its quests. but for the most part, it keeps the pace rolling along pretty fast. It also helps players unlock a bunch of new nanos really early, so you constantly feel like you're growing as a character. Throughout the intro area, I think you get up to the first 4 nanos, and just think about that in the respect, like 4 doesn't seem like a ton, but it's 4 times 3, because you get to choose from one of 3 abilities, so that's up to 12 options, and you can mix and match and make you can play the game the way you want to. Now, once again, I don't really want to bash the game too much for certain things, because I am looking at this older game from a more modern perspective, but I do really think that the game's quest tracking is kind of an absolute nightmare, because you can only have one quest being tracked at a time, and in order to switch that, you have to go into several menus just to find the actual screen and then select where you want to go. And it's kind of a similar problem that I had when trying to go back and play WoW Classic. Now, I didn't play WoW as a kid, like at that age, so by the time I did get around to playing World of Warcraft, the quest tracking was really nice. But playing WoW Classic now, trying to go from quest to quest in that game kind of sucks, because it takes a lot more foresight and knowledge of what's actually going on around you. And so, like I said, basically the intro section here covers the first 4 levels, but by doing all the quests, if you actually take the time to complete them all, you will be way over leveled when you leave the tutorial section, which can be a good thing. You'll instantly leave the tutorial and be able to get more nanos, but at the same time, it feels weird to be taking lower level quests because you're already a higher level than immediately out of the tutorial. So play as you will, but it might seem a little strange. Once the tutorial section is over, you go from the future back to the past, which is basically where the rest of the game takes place. You are now free to explore the completely open, extremely massive world. And I figure I should also mention this now. When I talk about the size of the world, there's also a lot to be said about the scale of everything. The world is big in terms of mileage, how far you can go, but it's also really tall, and basically like every tall building you can get to the top of. It's actually super impressive for what they did running this game in Unity in a web browser in the 2000s. It's kind of crazy that they actually managed to make it work, but it also sets it apart from other MMOs at the time, which I think a lot of them were just flat worlds, or there's like hills and stuff, but you're not jumping. There's no jumping puzzles. You're not climbing things. In FusionFall, they added that element, and I think it's a really nice connector for kids too, because it brings you from the games you might have grown up playing. Think things like Mario. If you're growing up in this era, you were probably playing Mario 64 or Mario Sunshine as a kid, And so going into this, it has that jumping element. It has that climbing, scaling, platformer element to it that a lot of other MMOs still to this day don't have. You don't get a ton of MMOs with jumping puzzles in them. And I think that's really cool how they kind of managed to make this world not just big, but tall. The way I kind of decided to organize this whole thing was within level groups. You probably already saw the screen where it says, this is the level 4 to 10 section. I just kind of chose to do it like that because each section of the game kind of has a different feeling to it, both from a gameplay standpoint and from my nostalgia standpoint, because the further I get into this, the less and less I will have played of it as a kid. So this section in here, I played a lot as a kid, because listen, to be fair, I still do this to this day. I would make a character and start playing, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm going to make a new character now. I'm still like that in MMOs. So this is kind of the best way, I think, to lay it all out. So from levels 4 to 10, I kind of played this like most other MMOs, where I wasn't playing the game consistently, and I would play it sporadically and make progress through the game. And it worked well because in this section, I could play for an hour or two a day and really feel like I was making progress. I could get a full level or two in that time. And that's something that really feels like it changes because things slow down. You get less and less XP as things go on. And I think having that sense of accomplishment early on really helps power the player forward. Level 4 to 10 is where the game really shines in terms of pacing, but I do feel like it lacks design-wise here. And I say that because later areas of the game have these really cool, unique world designs, but everything in the starting section feels pretty pedestrian. And I think that's okay. Again, it's just like, it's certainly a design choice. You know that they thought like, okay, we'll start simple and get crazier with it. But I think they could have added more of those crazy elements earlier on to just kind of keep it all together. I should also mention now that this game doesn't really have a main story like other RPGs. It's kind of more about the overall world and the little bits and pieces that add up to make that bigger picture. There are things called guide quests, which sort of serve as a through line through the game, but they mainly just exist to give the players new gear. So when you get to the past, you get to choose one of 4 guide heroes to kind of lead you through the game. There's Ben from Ben 10, Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, Double D from Ed, Edd n Eddy, and Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls. And each character kind of has their own storyline on what they're trying to achieve. And you can freely switch between each of these guides whenever you want to. But what's kind of weird about it is any gear you get from one of the guides can't be equipped if you're doing another guide's missions. But it's like if you want to switch, you will be able to pick back up where you left off and use the armor again. So when I played through this time, I picked Dexter because he has my favorite armor sets in the game. Dexter's story kind of involves trying to uncover the mystery behind disappearing heroes throughout the world, and I think it's the most interesting and the most directly tied to everything that's happening. Because you have the other guides like Mojo Jojo, whose whole thing is about being evil and stuff, and Double D, who's basically just searching for candy. So it's like, they're there and they are part of this world, but they're not really like pushing things forward as much as Dexter's story is. This first set of levels, as well as a couple of the later levels, are set in a zone called the Suburbs, which basically, if you want to think of the game's map as like a big grid, there are a bunch of these individual squares that are connected together, and each square is an area. The Suburbs is made up of a whole bunch of those areas, and they kind of connect different Cartoon Network characters together. You've got Codename Kids Next Door, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, all that kind of stuff is existing in this area. As we keep moving on from here, there'll be more and more areas, and I'll try to like highlight which areas are in which level group primarily, because they do like they tend to be around the same level, but it kind of splits up a little bit, and we'll get into that in the next section. Speaking of which, levels 10 to 20 is kind of where I started to notice changes in the game that I didn't particularly like. When I was a kid, I probably only ever made it to like level, I'm going to say 18, and that's just a guess, but it seems about right for where I was as a child. And so in like the later stages here, this was when the nostalgia was starting to wane away, and I was starting to see the game for more of what it was. And this is also where I started to see my biggest problem with the game. As you keep going, they introduce so many new areas super fast, and you end up being sent to all the different corners of the map for one quest. You might have to go across the entire map and back just to get one little quest done. And it seems cool. It's like a cool prospect that the world is this big, but it also really slows down the pace. So there are a couple different kinds of ways you can travel in the game. You can travel by foot, which is by far the slowest. Then there are also mounts, which are rentals, which is kind of weird. You like buy a mount and you get it for 7 days or something, which I know other MMOs do that as well. Actually, I know Wizard 101 does the same thing, but at least that one has the permanent mounts as well. This one, you have to rent it. Like if you want to get a mount again, you have to rent it again. And they lock mount speed behind level barriers. So when you're like level 5, for example, you can get the slowest mount in the game. And then as you get to a higher level, like level 15, you'll get a slightly faster mount. But the big problem is none of these mounts are really all that fast altogether, and it still takes a really long time to actually get around anywhere. The overworld also has sort of a tram system that is kind of connected everywhere, where you can hop up onto these little bars that go over the entire world. You have to wait for a tram to arrive, and then get on it, and you can ride it to wherever you have to go. It's faster than a mount, but it also is still not that crazy fast. Then there are the Mojo Jojo monkey-like trams. What are the monkey-like riders? I don't know. You go pay them and they'll carry you somewhere. And this works like Flight in like World of Warcraft, where you have to sit and watch the entire journey. You're not skipping things, but you can go from one place to another. And each monkey guy can only go to a certain area around him, so you can't like take one to any point in the game. Then finally, there is the actual fast travel network in the game, and that fast travel is like an instant teleport, but they only go to very, very specific locations. So if you want to go from one corner of the map to another, you're basically required to say go from the fastest route first, take a fast travel somewhere else, then take a monkey somewhere else, and it might just be to talk to one person. Then you have to do the entire thing in reverse just to get back to the quest giver so you can turn in the quest. And what ends up happening is you end up spending most of your playtime waiting just for a frickin' mount to go somewhere. You're not actually playing the game, you are doing a task, and it doesn't feel quite as fun anymore. Now, I know that's a lot of negativity, but at the same time, the game is introducing a lot of cool new areas and enemy designs, and I do really want to highlight that. There are certain locations that I really love, like there's an amusement park in the downtown area that's super cool. There's the power plant, which is one of the craziest in terms of platforming. There are quests in there where you have to get to the highest point and then ride a slide back down, and it's super cool to try to figure out the puzzle of jumping up there properly. And I think this is really where you start to notice oh, there's a lot of effort being put into this world, because like I said earlier, in those first level 4 to 10 areas, it's pretty standard. But you start to really see where they're putting the pieces together here. And it only gets better in terms of design from here. But at the same time, there is that same drawback of, oh my god, this is kind of a slog to get through all of it. And when I say slog, I really mean this is a slog. Because where a lot of mainstream MMOs have this pretty standard system where you'll go to a new area, you'll pick up a bunch of quests, and all those quests will be around the same area. You'll be doing you might have to go to an enemy camp and kill a bunch of this enemy, or loot some item that's there, or beat a boss that's in that encampment. FusionFall doesn't do that. And what it does is you might go to an area and there'll be 7 or 8 quests around, and they will each take you to a different corner of the map. So, in order to complete an entire zone, you might have to, like I said, fly somewhere, fast travel somewhere, go there, then go all the way back, and then do it all over again, because you got to go to the other corner of the map to complete a quest. It ends up taking forever, and you have to do more and more quests per level to level up. And this game isn't like MMOs in another respect, that the quests are completely locked by level. Some MMOs will let you take a quest that's 1 or 2 levels above you. This game doesn't do it. The quests are completely locked and not even available on the map until you hit that level. This all goes to say that the pace of the game grinds to a halt in this section, and it only gets worse and worse as we keep going on. And so it kind of really does drain the fun out of things as you keep going. There's also this problem where the game severely limits you on how many quests you can pick up at a time. You're only able to have 5 quests in your journal at one given time, and that prevents you from gathering all the quests in an area and traveling around in a way that might be somewhat faster, even though it's still slow, than maybe having to take 5 and doing all those and then coming back and turning them in and picking up another 5 if you can. There still might be more quests. Or you might not get any quests, because around this time, the number of quests per level also keeps dropping, which feels really weird because you need more quests to level up. The supply and demand are just completely out of balance here. So you end up having to grind enemies, or they have these things in the different quote-unquote infected zones, which are different cordoned off areas of the map where you go, usually for nano quests or to fight fusion enemies. But they have these race missions where you have to race through those zones while collecting items really fast, and that becomes the best way to get XP outside of quests, because you just don't have the quests to do it. Okay, so this is a little sidebar to talk about the different versions of FusionFall. Primarily the two different versions you'll come across if you choose to play the open source version of the game right now. There's the original release of FusionFall, similar to how it was in 2009, although some servers, such as the Retrospective server where I played, did make some quality of life updates that weren't in the base game. But there also exists another version of the game, primarily called Academy servers. The Academy update was an official FusionFall release that came out in 2011. It added a ton more characters, more nanos, and more quests to the game. It also completely revamped the game's introduction and tutorial sections. Now, in all honesty, I have never actually played the Academy update, but from the way it sounds doing reading on the forums and research, the fact that the game has added more quests actually made it a breeze to get through and reach max level. And maybe that would have made my attempt at replaying the game into a better experience. But when I started playing the game, my intent was to experience it as I did when I was a kid, which was before these changes actually came out. It might be worth taking a peek at the Academy server at some point just to see how it all is, but that's something for future Andy. Anyway, back to the game. And here we are. This is where things really faltered. I originally set out with the goal of getting to max level and beating FusionFall, but it really quickly dawned on me what kind of undertaking that would be. The amount of time it took to gain one level was rising exponentially, and at the same time, the number of quests available, like I mentioned earlier, was starting to dwindle. To put it all into perspective, the number of available quests at level 20, there are about 20 new quests you can accept, which is not including your guide mission that you get every level. Then, at level 21, there are only 10 quests, and the numbers kind of jump back and forth, but by the time you reach level 29, you only get 4 new quests, and the amount of XP required is still higher and higher than that. You easily find yourself coming up short, and you're once again forced to grind enemies or races. Now, it should be mentioned that there is a nano ability for a couple of the different nanos in the game that give you an XP bonus. But if you don't have that nano out at the exact moment when you turn in the quest, you are shit out of luck on that bonus, which, to be fair, is only a measly 20%, which can be slightly increased to 24% using items. And then you couple all of this, everything I've said so far, with the fact that you have to keep going further and further in the game to travel because the map keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's absolutely huge. You will pick up 2 quests from one of the game's hubs, which will send you to 2 opposite corners of the map. The game just stops being fun to play, and it becomes a game of waiting while using fast travel to get from one area to the other. And I know, people are like, it's about the journey and not the destination. But when it takes you fucking 10 hours to get across the map to the destination, it's just not fun. The journey isn't worth it anymore. And you combine that with the fact that a lot of these quests don't have substance to them anymore either. You will find yourself traveling across the map just to talk to someone, and then you have to travel all the way back just to talk to someone again. And it oftentimes takes multiple different versions of transit just to get there. The late game has some really, really awesome zones, and I do want to highlight the really cool design in terms of the world here. You've got the downtown area, which kind of encompasses some of the level 10 to 20 stuff, but also higher levels as well. You've got the wilds, which have these really interesting, unique forest jungle worlds with a ton of cool infected zones. And it's just what's the point of reaching there when I know that I'm going to have to leave there and go all the way across the map again and then come all the way back again? The grind isn't fun. And I am someone who actually really enjoys grinding in games. I love the experience of leveling up in a game. But when at this point, where earlier I would play 1 to 2 hours and I could get 1 to 2 levels, it would take me 3 to 4 play sessions of 1 to 2 levels just to level up once. And there were so many levels left to go. I think I hit level 25, and there was still another 10 levels I needed, to 11 levels I needed to reach max level. And it's like, how much more of this can I put myself through? I don't want to be really ranty here, but like, it's kind of how it made me feel. And it's kind of sad because I have all these great memories of playing FusionFall. And I will say, I think those are all tied to the early section of the game where the pace is just breakneck. And feeling the slog of the later game, despite all the cool stuff they are adding, it just doesn't balance itself out. The scale is just tipped too much in one direction. Okay, that got a little ranty at the end, but the point is that I just couldn't beat the game. I just couldn't bring myself to wade through the muck to get to the finish line. So, what happened? Well, first, let's talk about the company behind FusionFall, Rygon Entertainment. Rygon was a South Korean game studio who had dabbled in MMOs before with their previous game, Seal Online. Rygon put a lot of effort into making FusionFall, even with a major setback of switching the game engine close to the end of development. Something I mentioned briefly earlier is that the game was browser-based and ran in the Unity engine. Originally, the game was designed in a completely different engine, but it was decided to switch to Unity to allow the game to run better on more computers. Also, I really want to give another huge shout out to the FusionFall wiki again, because without them, I feel like a lot of this info would just be completely lost to time. So anyway, once the game was actually released, work began on updates and expansions for FusionFall, as is typically the case in the life cycle of MMOs, but that is when the first death bell tolled for FusionFall, because Rygon Entertainment filed for bankruptcy and shut down shortly after the game's official release. Cartoon Network then took over as the devs for the game, but they weren't adding any new content, and that's actually when they decided to switch the game to free-to-play. And what we were left with was a now stagnant game, hemorrhaging money because they kept running the servers and they weren't getting any subscription fees anymore. It's always a bad sign for an online game. So it finally comes back to what I discussed in the opening of this video. MMOs are hard to maintain under the best circumstances. You need a constant stream of players and a constant stream of new content to keep those players interested. And you pair that with the fact that the game just wasn't making money anymore, and you end up with what happened in 2013. Look at the most popular MMOs right now, and you'll see a common theme. Consistency. Consistent content updates and expansions. Consistent subscriptions, keeping the money coming in during the downtime between big releases, and consistent player engagement, keeping the world alive. Because at the end of the day, an MMO with no players changes from an online world to a liminal space in the blink of an eye. The final nail in the coffin for FusionFall, though, is what I want to call the cliff of growing up. The game was aimed towards young teens, with all of the child Cartoon Network characters actually aged up to be teens to match their demographic. I think aesthetically, this worked really well, but it definitely caused some internal confusion because they were advertising the game to kids still, and they kept a lot of the more childish, kid-friendly story writing and humor, which caused a disconnect for slightly older players who wanted to experience the game. You pair that with the fact that the older the player base got, the wider that disconnect would get, and really this is a danger of any live service game targeting kids or teens. People grow up, and it's so easy to lose your player base if you don't either A, adapt and age up with your audience, or B, adapt for the next generation of kids. But making either choice then isolates the other group. I'm not claiming to be an expert on game design and marketing. This is very much an outsider's view on the whole thing, so take everything I say with a grain of salt, as you should do with most YouTube videos. But really, I don't think there is a best choice here. It's a double-edged sword, and FusionFall fell right on the point because they didn't adapt at all, mostly, after Rygon Entertainment went bankrupt. So, FusionFall fell into memory. Good memories for sure, although, as I learned, that was mainly thanks to the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. But even though I experienced again and I didn't like it, it doesn't discount those memories. I will always be fond of FusionFall, even if it's just for those memories from when I was a kid. If you came here to hear more about FusionFall, this is basically the part where that ends and I get to reflect a little bit, so feel free to stop watching here if you don't care for that stuff. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about nostalgia now, and also pad the runtime a little bit. I started this channel last year when I rebranded my old Twitch account and I began streaming again, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with it. I've run a few YouTube channels over the years, but the problem that I always run into is that I get too burned out by focusing on pumping out content or by sticking to just one thing. Like a lot of people, I do a lot of different things, so I don't want to force myself to just do one. My name is Andy Does Things, not Andy Does Thing, although my username on YouTube is Thing because the other one was taken. But with that being said though, I've tended to stick with the theme of covering stuff that I'm nostalgic for, be it games or movies, and I even have a few books that I actually want to cover. But my question to the people who stuck around till now is, what kind of stuff do you enjoy? Because I really just want to create things. I love creating things. I'm curious what kind of things people actually want to watch. So seriously, let me know. Use the comments. It's there for a reason. Anyway, I've probably talked off your ears enough for now, so I think I'll just leave you with that for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's been almost a year in the making now, and I'm happy to finally be done with it because having 25 gigabytes of FusionFall footage on my desktop is getting harder and harder to explain. If you want to catch me live, I stream over on Twitch 3 times a week at twitch.tv/AndyDoesThings. And I'm actually currently doing a thing called the Year of the Franchise where I play through complete game franchises. And right now we are completing Mass Effect for the first time. So come stop by and hang out. But until then, peace out, y'all. Hopefully I'll have a few more videos out in 2025 if I finally get around to making them. We'll see.